20:10 czas na kolejne wystąpienie w temacie różnice między wschodem a zachodem firm EMS w Europie. Prezentacja, wystąpienie będzie w języku angielskim. Na naszej scenie Dieter Weiss z firmy in4ma. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the topic, the East-West difference of EMS companies in Europe. On our stage, Dieter Weiss from in4ma. Zaczynamy, zapraszam.
Dzień dobry, panie i panowie. Cieszę się tu jestem. And this is probably the only Polish you will hear from me. I would like to talk with you about the EMS industry in Europe. And for those of you who don't know us as of now, we are a well-known research company for the EMS industry in the majority for Europe, but not only for Europe. We are researching in the United States as well, and we are looking once in a while on a global scale. Our data are being used by all the big EMS companies, and they are always eager to look at our annual and half-year surveys. Now, what I would like to do today is I would like to give you an overview, and the focus will be on Central Eastern Europe. Now, this is a chart which I always show and immediately say, this chart is not correct. It'll never be correct. For the simple reason, we are researching this all the time, and once in a while it takes us half a year, sometimes even a year before we find out there's a small company closed. So we have to update this, and you always have to look at the upper right corner to see what is the actual revision status of this chart. Now let's have a look at Poland. Lately you have been very heavily worked on Poland. The last revision only had 81 companies. Now we have 138. There are more than that. But we have a clear rule for our work. If a company does less than 100,000 euros in revenue, and I talk not about monthly revenue, I talk about annual revenue, we don't put them in our database. In addition, my colleague Mareike has checked a lot of people in regards to their addresses, and we find out that a lot of these companies are working from home. So you do have companies which maybe one employee sitting with a soldering iron at home in his living room and soldering some components. So we don't look at those. We only look at the real big EMS, and that means minimum 100,000 per year. Now, this is always a matter of discussion. What is East and what is West? Let me clearly say this is not a political statement. But as a market researcher, we have to look at the differences in the market. What are the differences? And the big differences are the labor cost. I'm going to see that in a minute. When we did this chart earlier this year, we were expecting to see some better numbers in 2023 in Eastern Europe. But when the final numbers for the big companies came out, we realized that, and those are the three biggest European companies. Yeah? Foxconn is not only the global leader, he is a European leader as well. And Foxconn has 6 factories in Europe. And these factories have lost 20%. If you remember, Foxconn on a global scale lost more than 10% of its revenue in 2023. But in Europe, it was even 20%. Yeah? And that is something which we cannot predict. It's simply too much. Yeah? And if you then add Flex and Jabil with their European factories, you can say that between 26 and 30% of all European revenues are being generated by those three companies with a total of 19 factories, and in actual fact that is not correct anymore as well. For those of you who watch the news carefully, know that Jabil just opened up a new factory, and if I'm not mistaken, that new factory is going to be in Croatia. Yeah? So it's going to be 20 in a while. If we look at the top 20, you see it, Foxconn, Flex, and comes Zollner. For Jabil, Jabil has two production areas. Production area number one is EMS, and then they have a second one, which is likely the same revenue size as DMS, Diversified Manufacturing Service. Something totally different. Okay, something totally different in regards to the products, nothing to do with electronics. So that is why we only take the EMS side. Then comes GPV, which became that big due to the fact that they bought Enix, yeah? Then Astiel Flash, and so on. If we look at Poland, Poland has only one company in the top 50, and that is at number 21, Fideltronik. If we then continue to number 20, oh no, that is 20, typing error, top 25, only European companies. Then you'd see Zollner is the biggest European company. And here and now, again, you have Fideltronik on position number 16. And now to the explanation, why am I making this difference between East and West? Even within Germany, there is still a huge difference in the labor cost between East Germany and West Germany. It's still 21% difference. And if I took it right, I would have to actually even divide Germany in two parts, which is more or less not possible. But the main issue is, as you can see over here, is the labor costs are still very much different. Then we have to look at it from the structure. Western Europe has developed the EMS industry very homogeneously over the last 50, 60 years. I think Zollner next year will be celebrating its 60th birthday. So there are 1,764 companies, EMS companies, which generate about 53% of the European revenues. That is quite homogeneous. And on the other side, we have about 461 companies. And the structure of that market is very heterogeneous because there are 35 companies which are the subsidiaries of global companies. Yeah? As I said, Foxconn, Flex, Jabil. Yeah? Some of these factories make 1.8 billion in revenue every year. Yeah? So that is a huge difference. You don't find any, with the exception of Zollner, any factory that does such high revenues in Western Europe. Yeah? In Eastern Europe, you have that. And then on top, you have a lot of small companies as well. So, and that was not organically grown. When the Iron Curtain fell, there was an electronics industry in the former communist states. But a lot of that had no chance to survive and closed. Or they were acquired, privatized, or whatsoever, and then continued running. But it was definitely not a homogeneous structure. So still, these 461 companies generate 46% of all European revenues, and that is a big difference. And not only that is a big difference, we do analyze as well the profitability. And just to show you the development, and we do analyze the revenues of companies by class sizes. Yeah? M is definitely not my class size. Yeah? I'm more XXL. Yeah? But M is revenue size of Marijke, 10 to 20 million, 10 to 20 million in revenues. And if you look at that, you see on average, they make about 5% profit before tax. But you see the blue bars as well. There's always a certain percentage of companies who are making losses. And if you look at the distribution, yeah, there are some companies who are always in the red, whereas others generate very good profits. And if I now compare that from Germany with Central Eastern, number one, there is not a single one which makes losses. They all make profits. Even some of them very small, but look at the average. It's double of what is achieved in Western Europe, in Germany, for example. And that is why I differentiate this, because only in this differentiation I am able to see the difference, show them to you, and allow you to get to the right conclusions how to develop the strategy of your company. That is the main aim of all this work, to give you data on hand that allows you to get to a better strategy for your company, to see where you are moving. Now, this is a nice one. It is not a chart of World War II. It is a chart which shows where all these orders come from. And if we just look at Poland, 19.1% of Polish EMS revenues come from Flex. 14.3 come from Jabil. 9.2 from Bitron. 7.2 from Scanfield, 6.3 from Kimball, 5.7 from Lacroix. Just to give you an example, Lacroix, everybody thinks a very big French company. No, Lacroix is not even among the top 10 in France with their French revenues. But they are very, very big over here in Poland. And then comes another 14.4% of revenues from other Western European companies. And so you see this on all these different countries. But there is one thing else which we watch as well. And that is the population. And if you look at it, Germany increased its population by 4.6%, Poland by 0.7%. Now look at Romania, minus 16%. That 16% represents about 3.6 million people. Over a period of 5 years, 3.6 million people left Romania. So, and if you talk with EMS companies in Romania, they tell you, well, our biggest problem at the moment is labor. We have insufficient labor. Yeah? And the point is, we have done a study for an international EMS who was forced by his customer to open up a factory in Europe. And we were to advise the company where to do it best. And their aim was, first of all, we go to the country with the lowest labor cost. Yes, Bulgaria, Romania has low labor costs. But now look at the population, 18 million in Romania, 6.7 million in Bulgaria. If you want to open up a factory, let's say with 300, 400 people, you cannot only look at the labor cost. You need to look at labor availability as well. And now look at Poland. Nearly 39 million inhabitants. So just assume that Poland and Romania had the same unemployment rate of 4%. Then you have much more labor availability in Poland than you have in Romania. And that was the reason why we finally advised the customer, go to Poland. Yeah? And they have now started building a factory, I think in the proximity of Wrocław. Yeah? So there is going to be a new facility of an international EMS shortly over here in the southwest of Poland, who will then start supplying his customer from Europe. Now, if we look at the situation in regards to the structure, that is interesting as well. It is only 6.8% of companies who generate 77% of all revenues. And then there is a long, long tail. If you look at the companies with less than 2 million in revenues, that is 672 companies who have less than 2 million. Do they have a future? Yes, some have, but not everybody. Some of them, or many of them, are relying on 1, 2, or 3 customers. If one of those customers leaves, then those companies have no chance to survive normally. So there is a lot of adjustment necessary over here, and we are just analyzing the same situation in the United States. In the United States, they make 2.5 times more revenues than Europe, but with half of the EMS companies. So the average size of the companies is much bigger. And what has happened over the last 5 years in regards to the revenue development, and if you look at that, if you wanted to be amongst the top 5 years ago, you needed more than 580 million in revenues. And that increased to 1.4 billion if to be among the top 5. And you see that as well if you look at the growth rates in red. The big companies are growing faster than the small companies. So there is a difference. And at the same time, I don't show any charts this time. There is a lot of mergers and acquisitions going on, which will further consolidate the market. Now, as said, I want to focus on the Eastern European market. And again, you can question this chart. I have no problem if you question this chart, because there are companies who not only are EMS companies, but who are as well OEMs, or who have side business. In some cases, we can identify and separate it. And if we are able to do and separate the EMS business from the OEM business, we do that, and then the company goes lower. On the other thing, and that is a thing we just had a discussion this week about it, Evertiq being a company who not only do EMS, but they do a lot of electrical installations and electromechanical work, but we cannot differentiate what part of their business is EMS. So they are in here with their full revenues. And that is, yes, that is an inaccuracy. Still, it's better than having nothing. If we now look at the biggest Eastern European companies and their development, you have a relatively stable Czech Republic, which is dominated by Foxconn. Foxconn has 3 factories in the Czech Republic, and they generate about 80% of the revenues in the Czech Republic. Then we have Hungary. Again, there is 2 Foxconn factories, but there is Videoton, Videoton as well. And then we have Poland. Poland with a growth rate of more than 100% over the last 10 years. But Romania beats them all. Smaller. Yeah, Romania has only 38 EMS factories, but it's nearly all international factories who are having their subsidiaries over here. But they grew by 233%, and then the rest is not that important to mention. The only thing I would like to point out to you is have a look. In 22, wasn't there this chip crisis? This chip crisis where everybody was screaming, not having sufficient material to do that. How were they able to make 16% more in revenues? I'm going to get to that later. Now, over here, you see the top 30 domestically owned EMS companies in 24. Again, there is Elektro-Tim, which is questionable. Yeah, but the biggest one is Videoton in Hungary, and then followed by Fideltronik over here in Poland. And then there is Elrad, who does not only classical EMS, but does other work in the ceramic business as well. And on the other hand, for example, Hansa Matrix could be rated up higher, because if you just look at the revenues, we know, for example, that Hansa Matrix gets a lot of the components supplied by their customer. If I took those components and calculated their value into the revenues of Hansa Matrix would probably be on position number 3 or number 4. Now let's look at the top 30 in Poland. There is Flex, Jabil, Bitron, and on number 4, Fideltronik. Then comes Scanfil, Kimball, Lacroix. Deal Controls. Many people think Deal Controls is an OEM. No, they are not. Deal Controls has a big customer like, for example, Miele or BSH, Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte. And they are doing a lot of electronics for the washing machines, for the dishwashers, and all of these things. Technisat Digital, again, people think they are an OEM. They are not. They are an EMS. They are actively working on the EMS thing. And then you have TPV. TPV is a big company manufacturing, for example, televisions. But only 10% of their revenues are EMS work, and therefore they are only recognized with 10%. Kitron, don't ask me why the 1.5% is there. That is wrong. Yeah, Kitron is normal. And then comes Interphone, USIS, Flash, and so on. Now, if we look at the development in Poland of the revenues, and again, we are doing first-level research, primary research, which means we go into the country company register, and every year we pick out the revenues for all these companies. And then we just put that into Excel and let it add up, and that is what the outcome is. And now have a look. Poland, 21, 22.8% revenue increase. 22, 27.5% in a chip crisis. Did you manufacture all these products without semiconductors? Probably not. Now then the argument normally comes, oh, no, you cannot do that. We had price increases, and that is what it is. And we had to buy material for our customers, which we were able to already charge to the customers. Yes, you did. And we did research that as well. And the outcome was that of those increases, 1/3 was price increases and additional materials. 2/3 was quantity. And now, let me show you another reason why this cannot be all price increases. That's going to be the next one. Yeah. First of all, I'm going to show you how much of that is done by international companies and how much is done by the smaller Polish companies. It's in the majority the big one who are dominating the revenues in Poland. But now if you look at the headcount, Poland increased headcount by 8.4% 22. Did they only hire new employees to put all the excess inventory into the shelves that they bought? No. They actually, and we have seen that in any other countries as well, in Sweden, in Germany, in Estonia, they all hired more people in 22 because the output was much heavier. And I can show you that over here in Scandinavia. You see down there, Sweden, 11% in 21, 21.7% in 22. And if you look at the labor, they increased labor by 9.9%. So definitely there was a huge increase in quantity output. But now comes the question, what happened next? What happened in 24? And we, as do always, do annual services and half-year surveys. And what you see over here is for 119 companies in DACH, in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, and 73% of them had lower revenues in the first half of 24 compared to the first half of 23. And the overall output was that the billings in the first half were minus 12.4%. The only positive thing is that the inventory levels further reduced. But even for the full year, companies forecasted a decline in revenues of 10.6%. Now let's have a look at the public companies. First of all, these 9 companies increased their revenues by, on average, 12%. In the first half of this year, they reduced by 12.1% again. So, whereas they in 23 had a plus of 550 million, they now, in only a half year, had a minus of 312. So everything they had gained, they already lost again. And again, this is nothing which only affects Europe. We have done the research as well for the big global companies. And if you look at their development, again, exception, Celestica, but everybody else had a decline in their business. And now comes the sad story for the distributors. The distributors have seen, starting in the first quarter of 23, a dramatic decline. And that decline is even more dramatic than the decline of the EMS industry, because people are using, first of all, the raw materials which they already have on stock. And now I come to the famous chip crisis, or how one can fool an industry. And I'm using a comparison with the toilet paper crisis, which we had in April 2020. And interesting, I always thought we only had that in Germany. But I talked with people and said, no, we had that all over Europe. Yeah? And that was something. You go to the shop and all of a sudden you see people buying lots of toilet paper. And then you think, do they know something I don't know? Is there an information deficiency? And then comes this behavior. If they buy toilet paper, I buy toilet paper as well. So they started buying toilet paper. Everybody started buying toilet paper until the shelves were empty. But going back to our situation, you have independent market players. You have the manufacturer, you have the distributor, you have the EMS, the OEM, and the end user. And all of them are separate, legally separate. But they normally work together over a longer period of time. You can consider that a supply chain marriage, because you don't change your suppliers all the time. So as long as that works, everything is fine. But now, coming back to the toilet paper crisis. There is this logic behind it. If everybody buys toilet paper, I buy it too. And instead of trusting each other as before, you start to gamble. We call that the bottleneck poker. And the bottleneck poker has a very easy route. It starts with the word allocation. It means something is short. And now comes the buyers and the procurement managers. And they are thinking, I'm smart. I now just double my order. And if I double my order, my allocation part is going to be double as big. What a stupid idea. Everybody thought that way. And that is what caused all of a sudden the order intake to jump up. Yeah? And you are destroying an existing supply chain by doing this. And still the majority of you think I was not involved. No, you all were involved. You all made the fault. They have numbers for Germany, for example. In 21, order intake picked up by 116%. 116. Is that real demand? No, it is not. It is artificial demand that is generated by the supply chain poker. Nothing else. And if we now look at the quantity output of the semiconductor manufacturers in 2021, in 2021 they increased output by nearly 22%. An output increase that we had never seen before. And still it was not considered sufficient, and still everybody screamed, chip crisis, chip crisis. Yeah? So if we now look at the data of the German Association of Distributors, yeah, they have plotted this over a longer period of time. And you see how the bookings jumped up in the first quarter. And they had a book-to-bill of nearly 2. They could not handle it. They simply could not handle this situation. Yeah? And only in the third quarter of 22, it became somehow leveled out. Because that was a time when all of the EMS all of a sudden had huge amount of inventory in the shelves. And, by the way, it was not only semiconductors they had on the shelf, they had everything on the shelf, and I'm going to get to that in a minute. And if you look at that over a longer period of time over here, you see from 2020 to 2022, and that is in this part not quantity, it's revenues, but that increased by 50%. And if we go back to the FPDE, you see from the first quarter 22 to the first quarter of 23, they increased revenues by 23.3%. And you continue to talk about the chip crisis. just because your customers had doubled the orders in the bottleneck program. Now, there is a general behavior in that respect, and that is called as well the bullwhip effect. And I'm not going to explain that too long, because then I'm running out of time. But what you see over here as well is the manufacturing quantities of the automotive manufacturers. They already saw a dip in 2018. That dip was very logical. There are two global car manufacturers, that is Volkswagen and Toyota. And they always fought for position number one. And that is why their output was much bigger than what actually the market needed. You might remember those days in Germany, the Berlin airport was still not finished. Volkswagen parked 800 new cars on the airfield because they didn't know where to put them anymore. That was one of the situations. Yeah? And again, if you look over time at the different segments of the electronics industry, you never see a market jump. Yes, a market can increase. Like, for example, in 2020, the PC and laptop market had a higher demand due to many people working in the home office, so that caused the market to pick up. But it didn't double the quantities. And even if it had done that, have a look, computer over here, that is just a part of it all. Yeah? It's not the total. So it's a very, very old rule. The market never jumps. And you need to realize that the market never jumps. And now I'm showing you the situation where we had the real chip crisis. The real chip crisis was only in Austria. You see, Germany already had 11.9% plus in 21 and 17.6% in 22. Austria had only 0.4%. That is due to the very simple explanation. In Austria, there are 4 big EMS, Jabil, Melex, CMS, and Becon. And they all have a high share of automotive electronics. And those 4 cause the Austrian EMS market to be around 38% automotive electronics. And what happened 21? In February 21, we had winter storms in Texas. And Texas has several semiconductor manufacturers. And NXP had to shut down the factories due to the power outage for 2 weeks. And again, semiconductor is not like semiconductor. There are many different types of semiconductors. And this NXP factory was manufacturing microcontrollers, microprocessors for the automotive industry. And that created all of a sudden a shortage because 2 weeks of production was gone. And then just a month later, we had the problem at Renesas factory in Japan. On the 19th of March, they had a big fire, destroying about 5% of the manufacturing floor. It took them 99 days to rebuild the capacity. And only after about 120 days, they were able to deliver quantities as before. But as I said, it is semiconductors not just all the same. And if you look at the microcontrollers, and red is the automotive industry, you see most microcontrollers are being needed by the automotive industry. And yes, they saw a chip crisis, definitely. But come on, nobody else saw this chip crisis. Memory chip, NAND flash, DRAM, logic chip, no problem at all. But we have to learn something. Storage is an expensive thing. And the distributors used to have a lot of storage. Now you remember the toilet paper crisis. Was it only toilet paper that became short? No. It took only a week or two. All of a sudden, flour, sunflower oil, pasta, canned fruit, canned tomato, all of that became short. Without any logic. And the same happened in the electronics industry. All of a sudden, it was just generalized. No, we are not talking about microcontrollers. We are talking about semiconductors in general. Semiconductors are short. So all the procurement managers threw in a lot of requests for delivery dates to the distributors. The distributors simply could not handle the quantity of requests anymore. And what did they do? They said, no fixed order, no delivery date. And that made the EMS industry even panic further. And what did they do? They started, well, let's buy everything we can. No, not canned fruit, not canned tomatoes, but buy the full bill of materials. And they started buying the full bill of materials, and that is what caused this inventory to jump up like that. But the distributors knew as well, we have no stores anymore. We like it, because no stores means no capital binding. All the stores are with our customers. But one day our customers will come back to us and say, hey, we want to give some of that stuff back because we don't need it. We ordered too much. And that is why the distributors implemented the rule, no change, no return. And that gave the industry another big problem. Now let's return to Poland. If you look at 2013 to 2019, on average, the market grew by 6.6%. And now, you see 21, 22, 23, big growth rate. If I now just calculate a normal growth rate of 6.6%, and then take 1/3 of the increase as price increases, then it means the green stuff is the stuff which was manufactured in excess. And that is the stuff which is lying at the OEMs in the shelves. And that is the reason why you do not have any orders at the moment. You're screaming, where have all the orders gone? Well, you manufactured them already in 21 and 22 and in the first half of 23. So don't complain about it. Your customers will only start reordering once they have eliminated that excessive stock at their own shelves. So if I do this calculation, and by the way, everybody can do this calculation themselves. Yeah? Just take your A customers and do the calculation. Then it will, in Poland, take about 15 months before the situation is solved. 15 months means all of 24 and probably is the first quarter of 25. But there is another thing which happened as well. In 22, you continue to order like hell. And with the implementation of no change, no return, you developed a new third supply market. And that new supply market were chip brokers and trading platforms. And the fact that the distributors are suffering more than the EMS at the moment is in part due to that as well. If we just take a quick look at the inventory levels, you see the inventory levels of the global ones, and you see that they started to decline already in 23, and you see as well Sanmina is quite good in the inventory levels, but Sanmina as well is not only PCBA but as well PCBs. In Germany, again, you see, the bigger the companies, the lower the revenue, the inventory levels in comparison to the annual revenues. And that is, again, numbers which we take from the balance sheet of the companies, and we just sum it up and separate it by the different revenue groups. And in the first half of 24, we have seen a further decline. We still defined a baseline. Because if we look back at the time from 2013 to 2019, on average, EMS companies had about 15% of their annual revenues in raw material inventories. And that is a baseline where companies should get to. But again, this whole scarcity is a misunderstanding. And this has happened before. And it just starts with a rumor. And the rumor is spread to the masses through multipliers. And it actually happens, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you need to watch out on this, and I'm going to get to that in my advice at the end. But before I do that, I would like to switch to another big problem. That is a problem of the European PCB industry. Now, you probably have heard about the semiconductor, the CHIP Act. Europe wanting to help the semiconductor manufacturing, and they thought having 10% of global semiconductor manufacturing was not enough, and it needed to go up to 20. And they put up a total of 40 billion in grants to the semiconductor industry. Now, you all have heard already that Intel has postponed their investments in Germany and in Poland in regards to the semiconductor. And yesterday we could read it as well, that Wolfcraft in the Saar in Germany is now, together with ZF, is canceling the investment as well. And it's simply due to the fact that in Brussels they still have not understood what electronics is all about. Yeah? You cannot just look at one individual piece. And if 10% is not enough, then tell me, how can 2% of PCBs in Europe manufactured be enough? We have a much bigger danger at the moment in the PCB manufacturing. You're just looking at the price, you say, okay, there's a huge difference in the price of a PCB manufactured in the Far East to the manufactured in Europe, so no question, I buy it all in the Far East. There are two dangers about that. Number one, so soon all European PCB manufacturing is gone, you become dependent. You become dependent upon Far East. Number two, you're not allowed, even so you think so. We have a segment which is called airspace and defense. Airspace and defense had a lot of products which go into military projects which are sitting in the United States. And there is ITAR, or ITAR, a rule that does not allow you to use China PCBs for such projects. And actually, in August of this year, we have had a whistleblower from inside the company who reported such an incident to the Department of Defense in the United States. And it was actually a supplier, probably an EMS supplier, to Collins Aerospace, which is now part of Raytheon, who had done exactly that. And the Department of Defense issued a fine of $200 million to Collins Aerospace. And I don't want to be in the situation of that EMS manufacturer who finally is being found guilty in that respect. He can shut his doors right away. So use some logic chance. buy a certain percentage of your PCBs in Europe. And if you look at it, that is the decline of the PCB manufacturers over the last 23 years. I could go further back, because 45 years ago, there were 2,000 PCB manufacturers in Europe, 2,000. And today, it is just 160, 170. And every month, we see a company dying. There was Zebra PCB in the Czech Republic, liquidated in January. Elco Group in Belgium filed for insolvency in February. There was ZVD Print in Slovakia, who closed in April. In May, Base Electron was acquired by Picese. In May as well, TTP Circuiti Stampati was bought by Starteam Global. In June, Diconex was sold to Somacis. In July, CSI in France had a factory fire, and they are stating they want to rebuild it, but the next 18 months there's not going to be any capacity anymore. In July as well, Brandner PCB in Estonia announced closing the factory end of the year. I was in Estonia last week, and they already told me the factory is already closed. In August, Somacis in Italy was sold to Bain Capital. In September, Würth closed one of the 3 German factories for PCB manufacture, and this was a factory in Schopfheim with about 300 people. And now in October, we saw a smaller one in Italy, P2S Elettronica, that went into liquidation. So there is a lot of further risk that every month we see one company dying. And you really need to consider buying a small quantity. Nobody asked about 10%. If you already bought 3 to 4% of your PCB demand in Europe with European PCB manufacturer, you would make sure that this industry survives and you have a supplier in 10 years from now as well. So that is the only thing I want to tell you. But all of what I have told you so far relates to the past. And I think all of you are sitting here and finally wanting to know what the future brings. Is that right? Yeah. And the point is, if I now tell you what the future brings, and if I tell you that the business picks up again in the first quarter of next year, by the way, this year is gone, forget about it. But if I state to you that the first quarter of next year, we see the pickup, 10% of you will agree and say, yes, I see the same. 45% tell me you are too pessimistic. It's already coming, it's on. And another 45% will tell me you are too optimistic. It will take another quarter. Only in the second half of 25, the business will pick up. You are all right. And I'm right as well. For the simple reason, with all the information I gather from you, I can only make an average value. And that average value has a distribution. Yeah? And you should realize that if I talk about this, the individual EMS company has a right, yes, to say it's wrong. But we don't only have EMS companies sitting here, we have suppliers. And they have the desire to know what on average happens. And on average, it happens that in the first quarter of next year, it picks up again. Yeah? Now, there are 2 more dependencies. Number 1 is the market segment the EMS companies are working in. if you're working in a market segment like, for example, aerospace and defense, you probably have watched company Secor, who have acquired 3 factories in the United Kingdom. And all of these 3 factories were in the majority manufacturing for the defense electronics industry. And Secor is reporting totally different numbers to you than the other public EMS, because their focus is 85% of their business needs to be industrial, medical, and aerospace and defense. And they will not touch anything else. So that is a good strategy. If you read the announcement of Kitron, I think this morning or yesterday, of the third quarter results, they as well said aerospace and defense running well. But then they said, well, we see a European economic slowdown. Sorry, we are not seeing a European electronic slowdown, at least not a general one. What we see is some stupid slowdown due to stupid politicians in Germany. That is a big problem. And we see a slowdown due to the fake chip crisis in the electronics industry. But all other industries in Europe are working perfectly. So just blaming the European industry in general is too easy. But it is a very simple part that in order to understand it, you need to admit, first of all, that you made a fault. And you made a fault in your logistics in 21 and 22. Rather than just accepting that your customers all of a sudden started ordering double the quantity and you just screaming, hooray, double the quantity, we love it. No, you should have questioned it. Some people even did, and I know that from my many contacts I talked with. And they said, well, when we asked the customer why he doubled the order, the answer was just, we heard there is a chip crisis. That is not the right answer. Yeah? One should have developed a common plan, and I can tell you that I still am a firm believer that the EMS industry should take over the logistics of their customers in order to prevent this. And we, for sure, should not listen to people who are running around at the moment and saying, after the chip crisis is before the next chip crisis. Because that is just a simple try to set out a cheap rumor in the industry and make you nervous. And I can tell you, some people have been stupid enough to listen to that. I have an EMS customer who called me and said, well, my OEM customer just sent me semiconductors for 1 million euros. And he said, put them in stores for my product. And then the EMS said, well, what for? And the OEM said, well, I heard there is a next chip crisis coming. Yeah? So that is the way things start. Yeah? And if we don't get to our senses, then yes, for sure, we're going to see another chip crisis. And it's not going to be funny. Yeah? For this year, we will see 70 to 75% of all companies making lower revenues than in 23. And we'll see about 40% of companies making losses. And we're going to see more insolvencies, that is for sure. And we're going to see more M&A. But as I said before, the market on average will pick up again in 2025. And that is, I think, the most important message I can give you today. And before I end my presentation, I would like to thank those companies which are actually supporting our work. See, we live from donations. We live from the fact that we have people crowdfunding our work. Because none of these companies were willing to pay us in full. I don't understand why, but anyhow. So we are doing a crowdfunding, and everybody is paying a small money, and including IPC, who is paying us as well. And that allows us to continue our work with qualified market data for the EMS industry. And who are we? We are a very small team. We are a team of 3 people. That is Mareike, who is sitting here in the first row. She's a partner and works together with me. And then we have Anastasia in the IPC office. She's paid by IPC, but she works 100% for me. And that finalizes my presentation for today. Thank you very much.